During her pregnancy preparation, she discovered that her husband was cheating with his secretary. The secretary deliberately sent her a message revealing their clandestine meeting's location. When she witnessed that revolting scene, she left silently. She decided to divorce her husband. After the divorce, her husband's uncle began vigorously pursuing her. The story opens with the heroine trapped in an emotional dilemma, filled with drama and conflict. It revolves around how the heroine deals with betrayal and whether she will retaliate against her ex-husband. What kind of expression and feelings would her ex-husband have if he knew his uncle was pursuing his ex-wife? Let's listen to this intriguing story together.
Chapter 1. A hand wrapped around Nyla's waist from behind. Clark pressed his warm body against hers and gently nibbled her earlobe. "Honey, I'm all cleaned up. Do you want to do it on the couch or the bed?" Before Nyla could respond, Clark picked her up and laid her on the couch, his tall frame looming over her. "Since you're not saying anything, I'll choose." "Let's do it on the couch," Clark said, his voice husky and his eyes filled with a flicker of fire that made Nyla blush instantly. Nyla was already beautiful, and the slight flush on her cheeks made her look like a tempting, ripe, juicy peach under the light. Clark's gaze grew darker. He leaned in to kiss Nyla, but she suddenly turned her head away. Sensing her resistance, he looked at her with confusion. "Honey, what's wrong?"
Clark, usually assertive at work, now looked at Nyla with a mix of confusion and hurt, which softened her heart momentarily. Despite that, she hadn't forgotten the explicit selfie she had just seen. She stopped him with one hand on his chest and held up his phone with the other, showing him the screen. "Explain this first."
Clark glanced at the screen and immediately frowned, grabbing the phone to make a call. It was quickly answered.
"Mr. Sumner, what can I do for you?"
Clark glowered, and his voice turned icy. "I didn't know my secretary started soliciting clients."
There was a moment of silence before Jordan's panicked voice came through. "Mr. Sumner, I'm sorry. That message was meant for my boyfriend. I must have sent it to you by mistake."
"Next time it happens, pack your things and leave." Clark hung up and looked back at Nyla, his expression softening, even showing a hint of grievance. "Honey, she sent it by mistake. If you're still upset, I'll fire her tomorrow. It's late now, so let's not waste time on someone unworthy. We haven't seen each other in a week. You need to make it up to me tonight." Clark pulled Nyla in for a kiss, but her mood was ruined despite the issue being cleared up. She wasn't in the mood anymore and pushed him away.
"I'm tired tonight. Let's continue tomorrow."
A flash of disappointment crossed Clark's eyes, but he didn't pressure her. "All right, you sleep first. I'm not tired yet, so I'll go to the study to handle some work."
It started raining heavily in the middle of the night. The sound woke Nyla, and she reached out only to feel the cold space beside her. She glanced at the clock, 3:16 a.m. Nyla wondered whether Clark was still working. She got up, put on a robe and went to the study, but it was dark and empty. Her grip on the doorknob tightened and her heart sank. Nyla's phone suddenly chimed, startling her in the quiet night. Seeing that it was a text from a stranger, she had a gut feeling that reading it would mean no turning back for her and Clark. A thunderclap boomed outside, startling her into accidentally pressing it.
"Still awake? Because your husband isn't with you." "I was scared because of the thunder and power outage, and he came to comfort me. Don't you want to know where your husband is?"
As Nyla read the messages and the boastful tone, her hands trembled uncontrollably. After a long while, another text came in with an address and a series of digits. Nyla bit her lip, grabbed her car keys and drove straight there. By the time she reached the villa, it was past 4 a.m. She entered the code and the door unlocked. The living room lights were on. From the entrance to the bedroom door, a man's suit and a woman's lingerie were strewn about, revealing the urgency of their actions. Seeing the torn red nightgown at the bedroom door, Nyla felt a sense of absurdity. Although the distance from the entrance to the bedroom was only a few meters, it felt like an eternity to Nyla. Standing at the bedroom door, she felt lightheaded and dizzy. She reached out, trembling, and slowly pushed the slightly open door. The sight of the messy bed and the naked couple entwined, their heavy breathing filling the room, pierced Nyla's heart. The couple was so engrossed that they didn't notice her standing there. Nyla's hand on the door frame turned white from gripping it too hard, leaving red marks on her palm. She had been with Clark for 8 years, from school days to marriage, envied by everyone around them. Until today she had never imagined betrayal between them. Now reality dealt her a cruel blow. Even the most sincere wedding vows couldn't withstand a fickle heart. Unable to bear the sight, Nyla turned and stumbled out, driving away. She stopped by a bar on the way and decided to go in. By the time Valerie Weir arrived, Nyla had already downed 2 bottles of whiskey, her gaze slightly unfocused. "Valerie, you're here?" Seeing Nyla surrounded by several men, Valerie frowned. "All of you leave." "No, they're fine here." "I said leave." After driving the men away, Valerie sat next to Nyla. "What happened? Did Clark really cheat on you?" Valerie was Nyla's university roommate and had witnessed Nyla and Clark's journey from school to marriage. She had seen Clark treat Nyla well all these years, so she couldn't believe he would cheat. Upon hearing Clark's name, Nyla's gaze dimmed and the heart-wrenching pain came rushing back. "I don't want to hear that name right now." Chapter 2. "I'm getting a divorce. Just thinking about him with that woman makes me sick." Seeing the defiance in Nyla's red eyes, Valerie's heart ached. "Don't think about it now. You need to rest. Decide what to do next once you're calm. I'll take you home." Nyla shook her head. "No. I don't want to go back." Returning to that house would only bring back the sickening images of Clark's betrayal. Each recollection made her feel nauseous. Seeing Nyla's reluctance, Valerie didn't insist. "I'll book you a hotel room then." After booking a room, Valerie took Nyla to the hotel entrance. "Are you sure you don't want me to take you up?" Nyla shook her head. "No, you go rest. I'll be fine." She waved with the room card and walked into the hotel. As Nyla stepped out onto the carpet, her legs almost gave out. She steadied herself against the wall, massaging her aching temples while searching for her room number. The alcohol was taking its toll and her vision blurred. She found room 8919 and tried the card on the door. Hearing no beep, she frowned and was about to push the door when it suddenly opened. Nyla froze. Before she could react, a large hand yanked her into the dark room. The door slammed shut, cutting off the light from the hallway. She was pressed against the door, a man's breath hot against her ear, making her shiver. The familiar scent of pine filled her senses, but before she could place it, she felt the warmth of his lips on hers. Realizing what was happening, Nyla struggled. Damon was strong, and with the alcohol dulling her strength, her hands felt weak, almost inviting as she pushed against his chest. Damon's hands roamed her body, leaving a trail of fire, and her body grew more responsive under his touch. Nyla tried to push him away, but he easily caught her wrists and pinned them above her head.
Let me go."
He stopped kissing her and chuckled. No need to play hard to get. His fingers traced her collar, the cool touch making her shudder. His body heat seemed to melt her, and her legs grew weak.
In the dark, Nyla's senses heightened. She felt Damon unbuttoning her clothes, her mouth dry, her last bit of rationality warning her that this was going too far. "Let me go." She mustered all her strength to push him, but he simply picked her up and threw her onto the bed. The bed was soft, so Nyla didn't feel pain, but the impact made her head spin. She tried to get up, but Damon pinned her down. Soon her clothes were gone and they were both nearly naked. He pressed against her, ready. His dominating presence made her tremble. She pushed against his chest, biting her lip to stay calm and clear-headed. "Mister, I think I entered the wrong room. Please let me go." Nyla's voice shook with tension.
Damon's voice was impatient, his tone cold. Still playing, he was about to get up and kick Nyla out when the room lights suddenly came on. Nyla had accidentally hit the light switch in her struggle. The sudden light made Damon squint. He was shocked when he saw the terrified woman beneath him.
Nyla, recognizing Damon, felt the blood drain from her face. The fear sobered her instantly. She couldn't believe it. The man was Clark's uncle, Damon Summer. Uncle Damon. Nyla had always been wary of Damon. He was the youngest son of Richard Sumner and Marie Thorne, doted on by them and known for his unpredictable, cold nature. Even outsiders avoided crossing him. When she married Clark, he had warned her to steer clear of Damon.
"Shut up." Damon's face was dark, his gaze icy, as he contemplated whether to silence her for good. Then his eyes shifted to her bare chest, darkening further. He turned away, getting off the bed. "Get dressed and get out." As Damon moved, Nyla caught a glimpse of him where she shouldn't, and her face turned red with embarrassment. Upon seeing her flushed face, Damon's expression soured even more. Still not leaving,
Nyla could not care less about her embarrassment as she hastily dressed and left without looking back. Once outside, she checked the room number and realized her mistake. It wasn't room 8919, but room 8916. She had entered the wrong room and almost slept with her husband's uncle. The thought made her headache worse. She should have let Valerie take her up. Unfortunately, it was too late for regrets now.
After Nyla left, Damon dialed a number with a glower on his face. "Delete all surveillance footage from the Empire Skyview Hotel tonight." Upon hanging up, he looked at the messy bed and sheets and lit a cigarette, his irritation growing. He had almost slept with his nephew's wife. What a mess.
Chapter 3. When Nyla got home, it was already past 6 a.m. As soon as she opened the door, she saw Clark sitting on the sofa.
He turned sharply at the sound of the door, his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. "Where were you last night? I called you dozens of times. Why didn't you answer?" Clark stood up and walked quickly toward her, reaching out to grab her hand, but she pulled away. He froze, about to speak, but she spoke first, her tone icy.
"You can stay out all night, but I can't?"
Nyla had always been gentle. In their 8 years together, they had hardly ever argued. This was the first time she had spoken to him so coldly. Clark sensed something was wrong and noticed her red, swollen eyes. His expression changed, and his hand clenched at his side. "You know, don't you?" His voice was calm, without a trace of guilt or panic, as if he had expected this day to come.
Upon seeing his unapologetic demeanor, Nyla's long-suppressed emotions finally exploded. All the good times they had shared, all the happy moments, were shattered the moment she saw him in bed with another woman. They could never be pieced together again. "Clark Sumner, how could you do something so disgusting? If you didn't love me anymore, you could have divorced me. Why did you have to hurt me like this?" Nyla had assumed that no third party could ever come between them. Unfortunately, reality gave her a harsh slap, waking her from the lies he had woven and turning her love for him into a joke.
Seeing her red, tear-filled eyes, Clark felt a pang in his chest. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. "Nyla, I'm sorry."
Nyla shoved him away, wanting to laugh, but only tears came. "Don't touch me with your filthy hands. Is it that hard to stay faithful?" Since we got married, I've met many excellent men and some have shown interest in me. But I've never crossed the line. If I can do it, why can't you?
Clark clenched his fists when he saw the disappointment and anger in her eyes. Nyla, you're the only one I love. It was just an accident with her.
His explanation sounded so weak that Nyla found it both laughable and nauseating. So you're saying I could sleep with another man and then tell you it was an accident? That I may have betrayed you physically, but my heart still belongs to you.
A flash of ruthlessness crossed Clark's eyes. If you dare, I'll kill you and that man together in bed.
Seeing his icy gaze, Nyla felt a chill in her heart. If he knew betrayal was unforgivable, why would he still betray her? She took a deep breath and spoke slowly. Do you remember what I told you when you proposed? She had said that if he ever betrayed her, she would not forgive him but leave him.
Clark's expression changed. I will not let you leave.
Nyla wiped her tears, her expression a mixture of ridicule and hatred. Whether you agree or not, I've made up my mind. I'm divorcing you. You don't deserve my forgiveness. With that, she ignored his reaction and went upstairs.
Clark stared at her back, his gaze dark.
Back in the bedroom, Nyla went straight to the bathroom to shower, unable to stand the smell of alcohol on herself. While applying body wash, she noticed red marks on her chest and paused. The image of Damon's hands roaming her body flashed through her mind, making her frown. She scrubbed the marks hard until the skin around them turned red, trying to erase his touch. After her shower, she saw Clark sitting on the bed with his head down, lost in thought. She frowned and decided to ignore him. They would be divorced soon anyway.
Clark looked up and saw Nyla coming out in just a towel. Her damp hair dripped water. Her freshly washed face flushed like a blooming rose with an enticing fragrance. The towel barely covered her hips, revealing her long, fair legs. His breath hitched, his gaze glued on her. Nyla didn't notice Clark's reaction. She walked to the wardrobe to grab her pajamas when a pair of arms suddenly wrapped around her from behind. Nyla, Clark's voice was husky, filled with undisguised desire. Clark had been thinking about how to win her back downstairs after she left. The only way he could think of was to have a child with her. He had come upstairs to discuss this with her, planning to take it slow. However, he lost control upon seeing her just out of the shower.
She turned and pushed him away, her gaze full of revulsion. Don't touch me. I feel dirty.
Hurt flashed in Clark's eyes. He grabbed her hands, his expression earnest. Didn't you always want a child? Let's have one now, okay?
Nyla shook him off at his matter-of-fact attitude. That was before. I might have a child in the future, but it won't be yours.
Her words enraged Clark. He grabbed her and threw her onto the bed, pinning her down. Say that again. His eyes were full of anger, but Nyla didn't care. It doesn't matter how many times I say it. I'm disgusted by you. I'd rather die than have your child. As soon as she finished speaking, Clark kissed her fiercely.
Chapter 4. Nyla froze for a moment, then struggled desperately. Just the thought of Clark kissing another woman the night before filled her with disgust and rage. Let go. Her struggles were futile against Clark, who only tightened his grip around her waist. As she fought, her towel loosened, revealing her body. His gaze darkened and he felt a rush of desire. Their bodies were pressed tightly together, and Nyla quickly noticed the change in Clark. Furious, she bit him hard, tasting blood in their mouths. Instead of letting go, Clark's other hand slipped under Nyla's towel. She had nothing on underneath, having just come out of the shower. She stiffened and struggled even more fiercely. Clark, get off me.
Clark ignored. Nyla, you need me too, don't you?
Nyla's struggles were in vain and she grew increasingly desperate. As Clark positioned himself, she closed her eyes in despair. Clark, don't make me hate you.
Clark halted abruptly. Seeing Nyla filled with despair and pain, like a fragile porcelain doll about to shatter, made him pause. He wanted her desperately, but a voice in his head warned that if he took her now, it would be the end of them. He stared at her, his hand tightening around her waist. After several tense seconds, he suddenly let go and got off the bed, leaving the room quickly. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, making Nyla flinch. She clutched the blanket tightly.
For the next few days, Clark didn't come home. Nyla called him several times to discuss the divorce, but he didn't respond. The weekend arrived. Nyla was in the living room, sending out job applications when she heard the front door open. Clark walked in looking haggard. They stared at each other in silence until Nyla broke it, closing her laptop and standing up calmly. "Since you're back, let's talk about the divorce."
Clark frowned. "I told you, I won't divorce you. I'm here to remind you that we have to go to the family dinner tonight."
The Sumners held a monthly dinner, and ever since their wedding, Clark and Nyla had attended together. The family wasn't kind to Nyla, often treating her poorly. She endured it because she believed Clark loved her. After seeing him with another woman, however, she couldn't lie to herself anymore. "I don't want to go. Go by yourself."
Clark's expression turned impatient. "Nyla, how long are you going to keep this up?" He had ignored her calls and messages, hoping she would calm down, but she was still the same.
"I'm not keeping anything up. I just want a divorce."
Upon hearing the word divorce, Clark's patience wore thin. He looked at Nyla as if she were unreasonable. "Divorce? You haven't worked since we got married. How will you support yourself? Which company would hire you? And what about your father's exorbitant medical bills? Can you afford those? Nyla, you're not a teenager anymore. You're 28. It's time to grow up. I'm the CEO of the Sumner Group. I face temptations all the time. Sometimes it's hard to resist, but those women will never take your place as my wife. What more do you want?" Clark couldn't understand why Nyla didn't see that he still loved her, even if he couldn't commit to being with her forever.
Seeing Clark's arrogant demeanor, Nyla couldn't reconcile this man with the shy boy who had once blushed while confessing his love and promising never to hurt her. Maybe this was his true self. Selfish, proud, and condescending. If being mature means tolerating your infidelity, then I'm sorry, I can't do that. Find someone else. Here are the divorce papers I've had drafted. Sign them when you have time.
Clark glanced at the documents, sneering when he saw the section on asset division. "Quite the appetite you have, asking for half my assets. Do you really think that's possible?"
"I deserve it. Why not?"
Clark chuckled, his tone mocking. "Look around this house. Did you buy anything here? I've been covering your father's medical expenses for years. If we tally things up, you should be paying me. Should I have my lawyer do the math?"
As Nyla watched his bitter expression, she couldn't believe she had once loved this man. He had hidden his true self so well that, until she caught him cheating, she had thought he was a great guy. "Don't forget, if it weren't for me giving you that patent, you wouldn't be the Sumner Group CEO. And you were the one who told me to stay home after we got married. If I had continued my research, I would have earned far more than what you've given me."
Unfazed, Clark replied. "Who would believe you about the patent now? I don't want to argue about money, but if you insist on a divorce, we'll have to settle accounts. Nyla, as long as you drop the divorce idea, my money is still yours to use."
"Clark, you're despicable." Since he refused to divorce, she'd have to sue. She turned to leave, but he blocked her.
"Change your clothes. We're going to the family dinner."
"I said I'm not going. Tell them I'm not feeling well."
Clark grabbed her wrist. "Nyla, I'm running out of patience. Don't force me to cut off your father's medical expenses."
"You wouldn't dare."
Clark took out his phone and called his secretary. Cancel my father-in-law's medical payment for next month.
Furious, Nyla grabbed his phone and ended the call. You're crossing a line, Clark.
Crossing a line? Clark's gaze was full of contempt as he yanked her closer. Everything you have is because of me. Don't you think you're the one crossing the line? Change your clothes, or I have numerous ways to make you comply.
Chapter 5. Seeing the coldness in Clark's eyes, Nyla realized how blind she had been to fall in love with such a man. Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she refused to show any vulnerability in front of him. She yanked her hand away, took a deep breath, and headed upstairs. The only thought in her mind was to find a job quickly so she could move out and divorce Clark. She grabbed a random outfit, tied her hair up with a hairpin, and went back downstairs. She was never one to fuss over her appearance. In the past, she had dressed up for the Sumners' gatherings to make a good impression. Now she couldn't care less.
Hearing her footsteps, Clark looked up. Nyla wore a fitted white dress, her waist so slender it seemed it could be encircled with one hand. Her hair was secured with a jade hairpin, revealing her delicate neck. She was breathtakingly beautiful. The grace she exuded was just like when they first met. However, the look in her eyes now was devoid of any warmth.
Let's go, she said.
They drove to the Sumner residence in silence. As they arrived and were about to get out of the car, a black Range Rover sped up and stopped abruptly in front of them. Upon recognizing the car, Clark's expression darkened. It was Damon's car, someone he both feared and disliked. Damon was known for his reckless and unpredictable behavior. He had refused to take over the Sumner Group when Richard wanted him to run the company, choosing to start his own business instead. Everyone had expected him to fail, but within 5 years, his company had grown to be worth several times more than the Sumner Group. Clark couldn't stand Damon, partly out of jealousy. Once, a comment Clark made about Damon reached Damon's ears, and in retaliation, Damon refused to collaborate with the Sumner Group, costing them millions. Damon rarely attended family dinners, and Clark had hoped to avoid him. Luck wasn't on his side today. They met at the door. He didn't notice Nyla's stiffened expression when she saw Damon get out of his car. Clark opened the car door and greeted Uncle Damon. Damon glanced at him indifferently, his gaze briefly landing on the passenger seat before he nodded and walked into the house.
Nyla let out a deep breath. When Damon looked her way, she had forgotten to breathe, fearing he might say something outrageous. He was known for his unpredictable nature, always doing whatever he pleased. Fortunately, he said nothing. She decided she needed to talk to him privately later.
As Clark and Nyla walked into the living room, they saw it was already filled with people. Richard and Marie, the family heads, were chatting with Damon. He was the kind of person who naturally stood out in a crowd. Noticing Nyla's gaze on Damon, Clark frowned. "Why are you staring at my uncle?"
Nyla withdrew her gaze and replied coolly, "None of your business." Her coldness irritated Clark.
"Nyla, you know I don't like you paying attention to other men."
Ever since they got together, Clark had been extremely controlling, not allowing Nyla to interact with other men. She used to think this was a sign of his love, but now it seemed laughable. He sneered. "And I don't like you sleeping with other women, but you seem to enjoy it just fine."
Clark said through gritted teeth, "This is a family dinner. We'll deal with this later."
"If you don't want me to bring it up, then stay out of my business," she retorted.
Clark didn't want to cause a scene now, because it might affect the Sumner Group and his standing with Richard, who still held all the company's shares.
As they talked, Marie called out, "Nyla, Clark, you're here. Come sit down." Nyla took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she approached. She might not like the Sumners, but she maintained basic manners. "Hello, Grandpa, Grandma," she greeted with a smile. Marie, who had been urging Damon to settle down and get married, looked pleased to see the couple. "Come sit down." She turned to Damon with a hint of dissatisfaction. "Look at Clark. He manages the company well and has a beautiful wife. They might have children soon. And you? Almost 30 and still single. If you don't bring a girlfriend next time, don't bother coming."
Damon glanced at the couple with a smirk. She is indeed beautiful. He just wondered how that petite frame would suffer if she were to have children.
Nyla frowned, feeling uncomfortable with Damon's gaze.
Clark also noticed the inappropriate way Damon looked at Nyla. It wasn't the look of an elder, but more like a man admiring a woman. His hand clenched into a fist, and his body tensed. Chapter 6. Nyla lifted her head to speak, but Clark grabbed her hand and smiled. "Grandma, we're working on it."
Nyla tried to pull her hand away, but Clark's grip was too tight. If he wouldn't let her be, she wouldn't make it easy for him either. He turned to Marie. "Grandma, I'm looking for a job right now, so having children might have to wait." The room fell silent. Clark's grip on Nyla's hand tightened painfully and she winced. Damon glanced at Clark's hand on Nyla, noticing the bulging veins, then looked away indifferently. Marie turned back to Nyla with a kind smile. "Nyla, you and Clark are still young. If you don't want children yet, that's fine. Just don't overwork yourself. Our family isn't short on money. You can work if you want, but take it easy." Nyla nodded. "I understand, Grandma." With that, the awkward moment passed and the room returned to its previous warmth.
Seeing the attention shift away, Clark pulled Nyla out of the living room. Once they reached the gazebo in the backyard, he released her. "Nyla, have you lost your mind? Do you want everyone to know about our fight?"
Nyla rubbed her sore hand and said, "I was just being honest."
"Honest?" Clark scowled. "Should I call your father then?"
She glared at Clark. "You wouldn't dare. You were the one who cheated. What right do you have to be so self-righteous?"
Clark clenched his hands, a flicker of guilt crossing his face before it was replaced by impatience. "I promised it wouldn't happen again. If you don't want to see Jordan, I'll fire her. What more do you want?"
Nyla felt like there was a communication breakdown between them and turned away. "I don't want to argue with you here." When Clark saw her red-rimmed eyes, he softened. "Nyla, I truly know I was wrong. Just don't mention divorce and I'll make it up to you. I love you. I can't let you go." Nyla found it laughable. How could he claim to love her while being with another woman? Just thinking about him with someone else made her sick. "I will never forgive you." Betrayal was her bottom line. She couldn't pretend nothing had happened or reconcile with him.
Clark knew Nyla well enough to understand that he had to be patient. He believed she still had feelings for him. Otherwise, she would have made a bigger scene when she found out. As long as he refused to divorce her, she would eventually forgive him. "Fine, we won't talk about it now. If you don't want kids yet, we'll postpone it to 2 years later. Since you want to work, I'll have my secretary find you a position at the Sumner Group."
Nyla laughed at his arrangement, a mocking look in her eyes. "Clark, do you see me as a puppet you can control?"
Hurt by her gaze, Clark frowned. "How am I controlling you? You don't want kids now, so I agreed to wait 2 years. You want to work, so I'll arrange it. What more do you want?"
"Stop pretending. I don't want kids because I want a divorce. I want to work to sever ties with you."
Clark looked at Nyla's stubborn face, displeased. Since their wedding, she had been like a canary in his cage. He couldn't let her go. "As long as I don't agree, this marriage won't end. Even if you tell a lawyer I cheated, do you have proof?"
Clark's confident tone and controlling demeanor made Nyla step back, trembling with anger. She finally saw how selfish and disgusting he was. She had wasted 8 years, the best years of her life from 18 to 26, loving this man. "You make me sick, Clark."
Seeing the undisguised disgust in Nyla's eyes, Clark grabbed her chin to force her to look at him. Nyla, I understand you're angry, but I don't want to hear those words again. His Nyla should love him forever. He couldn't stand her looking at him with such contempt.
Nyla slapped his hand away. Don't touch me. You're filthy.
Filthy? Clark snickered, stepping closer and pinning her against the gazebo's pillar, kissing her forcefully. If she didn't stop saying things he didn't like, he would shut her up another way.
Nyla turned her head away. Clark's warm lips landed on her cheek, making her skin crawl. Let me go, Clark.
Fine, as long as you stop saying things that hurt me.
Never.
Then, I'll have to silence you my way. He grabbed her chin, kissing her fiercely. Just as his lips were about to meet hers, a soft cough interrupted from behind them. Clark, am I interrupting something? Chapter 7. Clark stiffened abruptly, his expression darkening instantly. He tightened his grip on Nyla's chin before slowly releasing her and turning to face Damon. Meeting Damon's amused gaze, Clark forced a smile. No, Uncle Damon, did you need something? Damon smiled. Your grandma sent me to call you both for dinner. Thank you, Uncle Damon. No trouble at all. But remember, this is the family home. Be mindful of your actions. As Damon spoke, he briefly glanced at the red mark on Nyla's chin, mockery evident in his gaze. Seeing Damon's eyes linger on Nyla, Clark frowned and stepped in front of her. I understand, Uncle Damon. His tone and expression were not pleasant, and his gaze toward Damon betrayed a hint of wariness. Damon smirked and casually looked away. All right, let's go eat. After Damon left, Clark reached out for Nyla's hand, but she dodged him, walking away without a backward glance. Clark quickly caught up, gripping her hand firmly. Behave, or I'll talk to your father.
Nyla's attempt to pull away halted, a wave of helplessness and anger washing over her. If she hadn't agreed to become a housewife back then, she wouldn't be under his control and threats now. She needed to find a job quickly, earn enough to pay her father's medical bills and free herself from Clark. Until then, arguing about divorce was pointless. Having made up her mind, Nyla stopped struggling and let Clark lead her to the dining room. After dinner, everyone went home. As Clark and Nyla arrived at their villa, Clark locked the car doors, making no move to get out. Nyla frowned. What are you doing? We need to talk. If it's about the divorce, there's no need. I won't bring it up for now. Clark's eyes narrowed dangerously. For now. Yes. Seeing Nyla's indifferent expression, Clark pressed his lips into a thin line, his displeasure evident. He knew it would take time for her to accept his infidelity. As long as she didn't mention divorce, he believed he had a chance to win her back. After a moment he nodded. Nyla, I'm glad you're giving me another chance. Nyla ignored his words, staring at him blankly. Can you unlock the car now? I'm tired and want to rest. With a click, the doors unlocked. Nyla immediately got out, heading into the villa without looking back. By the time Clark reached the bedroom door, he found it locked from the inside. He sighed, a smile tugging at his lips. In the early days of their marriage, she'd lock the door to show she was angry when he had been too rough in bed. She'd let him in after a few days. His smile deepened. Never mind, he thought, I'll win her over slowly. They had a lifetime together. As long as she stayed by his side and had feelings for him, she'd eventually forgive him. Inside the bedroom, Nyla was choosing an outfit for her interview the next day. After picking a few options, she sent photos to Valerie, asking for her opinion. Valerie called immediately. Why are you suddenly job hunting? Have you sorted things out with Clark? Nyla's voice was calm. Not yet. I need a job first. I have no income. Once I have enough money for my dad's medical bills and my living expenses, I'll discuss divorce. So you're going to live with him like nothing happened? Of course not. I have some money saved. I'll find a place to move out after the interview tomorrow. Nyla realized that divorce couldn't be rushed. Without a job or money, she couldn't afford a lawyer, let alone face the Sumner Group's legal team. She needed the best divorce lawyer she could find. She had no intention of leaving with nothing. Clark was the one who betrayed their marriage. Why should she leave empty-handed? If she had the means, she'd make him leave with nothing instead. As for her father's medical bills, she felt no guilt using Clark's money. Her research back then had earned Clark millions. Her father's medical expenses were a drop in the bucket. Which company are you interviewing with? Park Pharmaceuticals. You're going back to drug research? Yes. I've kept up with the field even though I haven't been working. It's what I know best. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Come work at my place. I can recommend you. Nyla laughed. You always complain about your boss. You've painted him as a tyrant. Are you sure you want me to join you? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before a male voice chimed in. Valerie, since when am I a tyrant? The voice was distant but laced with a dangerous edge. Valerie laughed nervously. Nyla, I've got to go. Let me know how the interview goes. We'll have lunch. Before Nyla could respond, Valerie hung up. Noting the late hour, Nyla raised an eyebrow. Valerie was usually disciplined in her routine. Having someone over, especially her boss, at this hour was unusual. She'd have to dig for details the next day. Nyla set her phone down and chose a modest light green dress, appropriate for the interview. She then put the other clothes away, grabbed her pajamas and headed to the bathroom. After the shower, she dried her hair, completed her skincare routine and went to bed. Meanwhile, in the study, Clark hesitated before anonymously posting online, asking for advice on winning back his wife after cheating. The responses urging him to divorce and let her go infuriated him, so he deleted the post. As he was about to head to bed, his phone rang. It was a message from Jordan. Jordan, Clark, I'm pregnant.
Chapter 8. Clark grabbed his phone, glaring at the message with a dark expression. He and Jordan had always used protection, so either she was lying or she had tampered with the condoms. Either way, it crossed a line for Clark. He called her directly. Where are you right now? Jordan felt a pang of bitterness when she heard the anger in his voice. Clark, I'm pregnant. Aren't you happy at all? Clark let out a cold laugh. Are you sure it's mine? Clark, you're the only man I've ever been with. Wouldn't you know better if it's yours or not? Her tone was accusatory, with a hint of grievance, but Clark just felt annoyed. Get rid of it. The only woman he wanted to have children with was Nyla. Women like Jordan, who threw themselves at him, were just for fun. He never took them seriously. No, this is our child. I'm keeping it. Clark frowned in irritation. If he had known she was so troublesome, he wouldn't have touched her. I'm asking one last time. Where are you? There was a brief silence before Jordan's tearful voice came through. Are you planning to force me to have an abortion? Clark didn't reply, his silence answering her. If you don't want this child, I'll raise it on my own. I won't let it know who its father is. Before she could finish, Clark hung up and instructed his secretary to find out where she was. When Nyla discovered his affair, he quickly learned that Jordan was behind it and kicked her out of the company. He didn't expect her to have a backup plan. That child couldn't be born. If it was, his relationship with Nyla would be truly over.
Late that night, Nyla, half awake, heard the car engine start but didn't think much of it. The following morning, during breakfast, the housekeeper mentioned that Clark had left in a hurry during the night, possibly due to an issue at work. Nyla didn't respond, sipping her milk with a hint of mockery in her eyes. An issue at work? It was more likely he was rushing to see that other woman. Nyla finished her breakfast and went to the interview. As she left, she messaged Valerie to ask where they should meet for lunch. Valerie replied with a restaurant address. Nyla put away her phone, got in her car and set the GPS. What she didn't notice was a woman in a lab coat with delicate makeup staring in her direction with a slight frown. The woman's colleague, also in a lab coat, glanced where she was looking but only saw Nyla's car disappearing around the corner. "Lucia, what are you looking at?" Lucia Pollard shook her head. "Nothing. I thought I saw someone I knew. Must have been mistaken. A friend of yours?" A flash of disgust crossed Lucia's eyes. "No, someone I dislike." "Anyone you dislike must not be a good person," the colleague said, trying to flatter her. Lucia appreciated it. "Let's not talk about it. It's a mood killer." When Nyla arrived at the restaurant, Valerie was just getting there too. But coincidentally, they encountered Clark and his mistress Jordan in the restaurant. Following Nyla's gaze, Valerie saw Clark sitting with a woman who was crying and occasionally giving him a longing look. Valerie couldn't believe Clark would be so brazen, openly bringing his mistress to a public place. "Is that the woman he's seeing?" "Yes." Nyla tried not to care, but seeing them together felt like a hand tightening around her heart. It made it hard to breathe. "I'm going to confront her. How dare she flaunt her affair in public?" Nyla quickly grabbed Valerie's arm. "Don't. Confronting them would only humiliate herself further. How can you stand this?" Before Valerie could finish, she saw Nyla's near-tearful expression and felt a pang in her heart. "Don't cry. He's not worth it." Nyla rubbed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I know. The moment Clark cheated, he stopped being worth any of her feelings. However, after loving him for 8 years, it was impossible for her to simply switch off her emotions. Eventually, she would distance herself from him until he was nothing but a stranger." Without looking back, Nyla turned and walked away.
Clark sensed someone staring at him, but when he looked up, he saw no one. Next to him, Jordan continued to sob softly, further irritating him. He lit a cigarette and said coldly, "If you won't get rid of it, I have ways to make sure you don't carry it to term."
Chapter 9. Jordan's sobs stopped abruptly, her eyes filled with grievance. "Clark, my feelings for you are genuine."
The thought of her scheming made Clark feel a surge of disgust. "What's your genuine feelings worth?" He pulled out a bank card and tossed it on the table, his expression cold. "There's $300,000 on this card. Take the money and get an abortion. Otherwise, I'll have my bodyguards drag you to the hospital. You know what to choose." Jordan hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the card with trembling hands and ran out of the restaurant in tears. Clark called his bodyguards to make sure they followed her to the hospital, then hung up in frustration. Upon seeing the photo of Nyla on his screensaver, his expression softened. Without much hesitation, he called her. It rang for a long time before she answered.
"What do you want?"
Nyla's cold tone was like a bucket of ice water, instantly cooling Clark's previously warm heart from thinking of her. He clenched his phone tightly, trying to hide his disappointment. "Nothing. Just wanted to hear your voice. Have you eaten?"
Nyla's eyes flashed with sarcasm. Clark was with Jordan and still had time to think about her. He really was a multitasking master. "I'm eating now. If there's nothing else, I'm hanging up." There was a brief silence on the other end before Clark's deep voice came through.
"Okay. I won't work late tonight. Let's have dinner together when I get home." The only response Clark got was the sound of the call ending.
In the private room, Valerie spoke angrily after Nyla put down her phone. "He's such a scumbag. Eating with his mistress while calling to ask about you. She used to think Clark was one of a kind and believed he would make Nyla happy. Nyla picked up the menu, her eyes downcast. Let's not talk about him. It'll ruin my appetite. Let's order. Seeing Nyla try to stay composed, Valerie felt a pang of sympathy. She knew that when it came to matters of the heart, only time could heal. No amount of words from others would help. Luckily, Nyla was clear-headed and had no plans to forgive Clark. After ordering, they chatted casually. Suddenly, Valerie remembered something. By the way, I heard Prospectus Technology is planning to invest in Park Pharmaceuticals. If I remember correctly, Prospectus Technology's CEO Damon Summer is... Nyla paused at Damon's name, gripping her glass a bit tighter as she recalled the heat of his breath on her ear that night. The invasive feeling still made her shudder. She forced the memory away and replied to Valerie. Do you want to consider applying to a different company? It'd be awkward to see the Summers if you divorce Clark. Nyla shook her head, setting down her glass. Even if I join Park Pharmaceuticals, I'll just be a regular pharmacist. He wouldn't notice me. Besides, Clark and his uncle aren't close. Moreover, Clark was the one who had cheated. If anyone should avoid awkwardness, it should be the Sumners, not her. Since they aren't close, can you ask his uncle for help with the divorce? Even if they don't get along, they're still both Sumners. Do you think he'd help me? Good point. Valerie sighed, looking disappointed. Nyla couldn't help but chuckle. Divorce isn't something that can be rushed. Right now, my priority is finding a job and moving out. The rest will follow. All right, I'll take the afternoon off to help you look for a place. No need. I can handle it. Valerie nodded reluctantly. Fine, but call me if you need anything. Move on a weekend and I'll come help. Don't worry. I won't hesitate to ask when I need you. After lunch, they parted ways at the restaurant entrance. Nyla contacted several agents and looked at a few places, preferring a one-bedroom apartment that was over 60 square meters. She liked the decor and location, but the rent was steep. Considering her dwindling bank balance, she decided on a cheaper apartment farther from downtown. Despite that, she chose to wait for the interview results from Park Pharmaceuticals before signing the lease.
It was past 6 p.m. when Nyla returned to the villa. Clark was sitting in the living room. Hearing the door, he looked up and was momentarily stunned. Nyla wore a light green dress with her hair in a high ponytail, revealing her slender, fair neck. She looked put together and lively with a hint of playfulness. Since their wedding, she had to attend events with him and adhere to the standards of a wealthy wife even at home. Once, Clark's mother visited and criticized her for wearing casual clothes and a bun at home. Clark had to admit that this lively version of Nyla was far more attractive and captivating than the version restrained by the Sumners' rules. Yet alongside his attraction, a sense of unease crept in, as if she could leave him at any moment. "Where did you go today? Patricia said you left right after breakfast."
Nyla changed her shoes as she responded. I went job hunting.
"Which company? Do you need me to make a call for you?"
Nyla frowned at him. This is not business. I don't want you involved. If he intervened, it would be no different from being under his watchful eye at the Sumner Group.
Seeing the resistance in her eyes, Clark felt hurt. "Nyla, I just want to help."
Thanks, but no thanks. She walked past him, heading upstairs. As she passed the sofa, Clark grabbed her wrist. In the next second, a bouquet appeared in front of her. It was the same Juliet roses he had given when he confessed his love. The flower symbolized a protective, pure, sincere, selfless, and everlasting love. Now, seeing the fresh roses, Nyla felt nothing but irony. Her marriage with Clark, tainted by his infidelity, no longer deserved words like sincere and everlasting.
Upon seeing her silence, Clark's voice softened. I passed by a florist today and thought of getting you some flowers.
Nyla pulled her hand away, looking him in the eye. Her gaze held nothing but disgust, impatience, and coldness. No trace of love remained. No need. I never liked these flowers. Chapter 10. Nyla discovered Clark's betrayal of their relationship and became cold towards him. She instructed the butler to dispose of the flowers they used to buy regularly and ignored Clark during meals. Although Clark was dissatisfied, he didn't say much. After dinner, an argument broke out between them. Nyla stated that she would not forgive Clark for his betrayal, but Clark insisted that he wouldn't let her go. Nyla decided to move out as soon as possible. She found a job and rented an apartment, leaving her account nearly empty after paying the rent. On Saturday, Valerie came to help her move, and the butler, noticing this, informed Clark. Upon learning about it, Clark was very upset and called Nyla to come back home. Chapter 11. Clark's commanding tone made Nyla instinctively frown. Whether you agree or not, I'm moving out.
Nyla's indifferent tone fueled Clark's anger even more. His voice rose. Don't forget, your father's medical expenses dash.
Before he could finish, Nyla coldly interrupted. Clark, if I remember correctly, your uncle Elijah's son is returning from studying abroad soon. You wouldn't want your affair to be known to the Summers at this Elijah Sumner. Clark's second uncle wasn't very capable, so Richard had invested a lot in Elijah's son. After all, the Sumner group was so big that they couldn't give everything to Clark. Over the years, Clark had always performed well in front of Richard. Now was a crucial time. He couldn't let Nyla tell Richard about his affair. Nyla had also considered this point in her choice to move out at this time.
There was silence on the other end of the phone. After a while, there was a low laugh. Nyla, I never realized before that you were a rabbit that would bite. Clark's voice was chilly, clearly filled with anger.
Before but now they were. Nyla lowered her gaze, suddenly feeling a bit sad. They had been so in love before, but now threatening and disgusted with each other. You taught me this. Clark didn't respond. After a cold laugh, he hung up. Nyla put down her phone, suppressing the bitterness in her heart, and forced herself not to think about Clark anymore. Valerie saw the vulnerability flash in Nyla's eyes as she turned around and sighed inwardly. Nyla had truly loved Clark. It would probably take a long time for her to let go of the pain and disappointment of his betrayal. Once they finished moving and unpacking, Nyla planned to treat Valerie to dinner, but Valerie refused. I have a date with my boyfriend tonight. Besides, you've just moved out and everything costs money. It's before Nyla could say anything. Valerie hurriedly left. Knowing that Valerie cared about her, Nyla felt a wave of warmth in her heart. Although she had lost love, she still had friendship and family love, which was enough to make her hopeful about life again. After Valerie left, Nyla didn't plan to eat out. She decided to go to the grocery store to buy some seasonings and groceries to cook at home. With her keys in hand, she walked to the nearest store. Having bought what she needed and leaving the grocery store, she realized it had started raining heavily outside. Nyla stood at the entrance, deciding to wait until the rain eased before heading back.
In a black Maybach on the roadside, Spencer Hogg saw Nyla standing at the grocery store entrance and felt a sense of familiarity. He looked a few times before saying, "Mr. Sumner, isn't that Ms. Jason?" Stan Spencer had met Nyla a few times when he accompanied Damon to banquets. However, if he remembered correctly, Clark and Nyla lived in the southern part of the city. Why would she be there at this hour, without any service staff or drivers? Damon, who was looking at the documents in the back seat, turned his head to look at the somewhat distressed woman holding a bunch of things and standing awkwardly at the grocery store entrance. He with Ms. Jason seems to be trapped by the rain. Should we give her a ride? Just as Spencer finished speaking, he realized that the temperature in the car had dropped a few degrees. "Do you have nothing to do?" Realizing Damon's displeasure, Spencer quickly explained, "Ms. Jamestown is your niece-in-law, isn't she? If it were another woman, I wouldn't dare to speak out. Besides, we don't know when this rain will stop. It's quite dangerous for Ms. Jamestown to be outside alone at this late hour." Damon scoffed lightly as he recalled how Nyla had gotten the room wrong that night. It had been quite dangerous. Such a foolish woman was rare. If she had encountered another man that night, she might have of. When Damon didn't speak, Spencer hesitated and asked, "Mr. Sumner, should we go or—" "You just said she's my niece-in-law. If I turn a blind eye now, won't others say I lack empathy?" Spencer was rendered speechless, thinking that Damon usually lacked empathy anyway.
Nyla waited for a while. Seeing that the rain was not only continuing but seemed to be getting heavier, she hesitated about hailing a cab. Just then a black Maybach stopped right in front of her. The rear window lowered, revealing Damon's cool face. Nyla was taken aback, clearly not expecting to meet him here.
"Get in. I'll take you back,"
he said coldly, his face devoid of expression, giving off an intimidating vibe. Nyla took a step back and shook her head. "Uncle Damon, it's okay. The rain will stop in a while." His imposing presence almost took Nyla's breath away. She involuntarily tightened her grip on the bag she was carrying. Before she could refuse, the front passenger door suddenly opened and Spencer got out to take the things from her hands.
"Ms. Jamestown, get in the car. This rain will last at least another hour, and it's windy, you might catch a cold."
Nyla couldn't refuse any longer as Spencer had already put her things in the trunk. She bit her lip and opened the car door to get in. As soon as she sat down, the faint woody fragrance on Damon invaded her. Her hands, hanging by her side, subconsciously clenched the hem of her shirt. The memory of that night when she almost went too close with Damon was too vivid, making her feel awkward just being with him. Damon seemed not to notice Nyla's discomfort. He put down the documents in his hand and looked at her.
"Why did you come so far to get groceries?"
"I moved here recently. Uncle Damon, you can drop me off at the entrance of the Fleur."
"Did you have a fight with Clark?"
"No, I found a job recently and living here is closer to the company." Damon didn't speak again and the car fell silent. Soon, the car stopped at the entrance of the Fleur, and Nyla silently breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank you for sending me back, Uncle Damon." She was about to push the door and get out when suddenly an umbrella was handed to her. Nyla immediately noticed Damon's hand, as she was someone who appreciated hands. She had even developed a liking for Clark starting from when she saw his hands. The joints of the hand holding the umbrella were distinct, fair, making it hard for her to look away.
"Take it."
She instinctively refused. "No need, I can run back."
Before she finished speaking, Damon's somewhat impatient voice sounded. "Do you want to get soaked like a drowned rat?"
Nyla went silent. After hesitating for a moment, she still took the umbrella from Damon. "Thank you." Damon didn't say anything, his expression somewhat indifferent. As Nyla got out, Spencer had already taken the things from the trunk.
"Ms. Jamestown, should I send you upstairs?"
"No need. I don't have much stuff. I can manage on my own."
Spencer didn't insist either. After all, Damon had a meeting later. After handing Nyla's things to her, he got back in the car and left. Watching the black Maybach's tail lights disappear from sight, Nyla turned and walked toward her rented apartment. In the car, Damon picked up the documents and said with a blank face, "Find out what's going on between Nyla and Clark.